So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the FIRE Forum 2023, which is the culmination of the FIRE project, and particularly to the urban development session. My name is Natasha Antoniou, and I'm the project coordinator of the FIRE project. FIRE, for those of you who don't know exactly what it is, it's the European Forum for Innovation and Research in Earth Observation, and is a project funded by the European Commission. The FIRE Forum 2023 is a series of 6 online events, one of each of our target sectors. And here I would like to mention which are our 6 sectors. So we have been tackling agriculture, infrastructure, marine and maritime, raw materials, urban development, and wind energy. These events are taking place this week. So we started yesterday, and we're going to finish on Friday. And each day will feature 2 sessions. We have one morning and one afternoon. This morning, we are starting with the urban development session, but in the afternoon, we will continue the discussion about the infrastructure sector. So what is the main goal of FIRE project? At the beginning, we wanted to build a strong community and a well-defined process that captures the now and shapes the tomorrow of the European Earth observation sector. But also, we wanted to create a strategic roadmap for the future of Earth observation in Europe. And I'm very proud to say that the FIRE team, within these 3 years of the project, has succeeded it. So in a few minutes, you have the opportunity to discover the FIRE roadmap for the urban development sector. And in the next couple of hours, we will discuss together the way forwards. We have the pleasure to have together with us 6 experts from the urban, but also from the Earth observation sector. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers for agreeing to share their expertise and spend these 2 hours with us. I would also like to encourage all of you to contribute actively to the discussion, because this is kind of, an active workshop. But obviously, we have some housekeeping rules. First of all, it would be very nice if you all rename yourself and put your full name and organization so we know with whom we are talking. It would be nice to stay mute unless our moderator gives you the floor. We prefer if we see your faces, so feel free to use your camera because it's not nice our speakers, they're talking in black boxes. For the questions or comments, we have our chat. So use it, and then our moderator will go back to the questions, and then he will give you the floor to address your question directly to the speakers. And obviously, you have been seeing that this workshop is being recording, and at the end of the FIRE Forum, you will get all these recordings. So without any further ado, get your coffee, your tea, be comfortable, and let us begin our urban development session with a very nice video we have been preparing for you, which shows what Earth observation can do for the challenges that our cities face. Then we will move immediately to the long-awaited roadmap, which will be presented by my colleague Nico Thom from Evenflow, and he will also be the moderator of the day. So thank you so much and enjoy the session.
Well, thank you, Natasha, for the introduction and showing us the video that sets the context for today's discussion. Good morning also from my side. My name is Nico Thom. I'm with Evenflow, one of the partners involved in the FIRE projects, the others being EARSC, Verhart, and NOAA, the National Observatory of Athens. And today I shall be your moderator. And as Natasha said, this is kind of the end of the FIRE project, where we are standing here with the roadmap in hand. But to create actual value, we also need now to ensure that it is being put to use. And the panel discussion we are having today on urban development as a specific subject should be one of the means to ensure that transition, and we are now having to validate the actions that we are proposing. We have to ensure that they are implemented, and we also have to ensure the continuity of the dialogue that we initiated between industry, policymakers, and the end users in the different sectors, including the one of urban development, and also with research and development. And I believe we have today the panel that allows us to do exactly that. And allow me to introduce to you briefly, and then I will ask each of you also to introduce yourself in more detail so we understand what is your role in the context of today's subject. We have with us today Richard Tavares from the European Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency, CINEA. We have with us Joachim Maes from DG REGIO, and from the EU Agency for the Space Program, we have Valeria Catalano. Also with us today, Evangelos Gerasopoulos from the National Observatory of Athens, who's also director of the Greek GEO office and has many different roles that engages him in research and development linked to EO and urban. And we have representing industry, Wendy Carrara from Airbus, who's also among the board of directors of EARSC, the European Association for Remote Sensing Companies. So she's not only representing Airbus, but indeed a large part of Europe's EO industry. And allow me to ask you to introduce yourself in a bit more detail, yet briefly, and I do that randomly by the order of how I see you on my screen, maybe starting with Richard.
Good morning, Richard Tavares. I'm a project advisor, currently working at CINEA, the European Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency that was established by the European Commission since April 2021 to support the implementation, in particular, of the Horizon 2020 legacy and the Horizon Europe work programs, in particular in different fields of climate action, environment, from the global to the local and urban scale, including the climate missions, cities and climate adaptation, and the partnership driving urban transition.
Thank you, Richard. Joachim, could you say a few words about yourself?
Hello, good morning. My name is Joachim Maes. I work in the European Commission's Directorate General for Regional and Urban Policy. I work there as a policy analyst in a unit that develops the cohesion policy and that also provides economic and environmental and social analysis and data to support that policy. I work there as an analyst. The unit develops actually the cohesion policy. We are currently preparing now, or we start preparations for the next policy cycle from 2028 to 2035. In the analysis part of the unit, we look at the state and trends of social, economic, environmental, and territorial cohesion disparities between regions and cities of the EU. Urban policy is our competence, and we also have special programs on that. Just before, I've been in REGIO since 2021. Before that, I worked at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, where I also did quite some work on urban areas, in particular on urban green spaces and urban biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. Valeria, a few words.
Hello, good morning. My name is Valeria Catalano, working in the European Union Agency for the Space Program. I'm in the Market Downstream and Innovation Department, where I am responsible for the infrastructure segment, but also for some specific applications of urban development. And I'm also responsible coordinating our R&D activities.
Thank you, Valeria. Evangelos, you're next on my screen.
Thank you, Nico. So this is Evangelos Gerasopoulos. I'm a research director at the National Observatory of Athens. My background is atmospheric composition and air quality. During the last years, among several R&D projects, I have been coordinating a Horizon 2020 project on smart cities called SMURBS, Smart Urban Solutions, which was mainly attempting to promote the use of Earth observation to develop solutions for the urban domain in areas like air quality, disasters, Sustainable Development Goals, and etc. I'm also the director of the Greek GEO office, the national focal point for coordination of the Earth observation, and co-chair of the GEO program board. And something that we probably will be talking about today is also the approval of GEO from GEO of a fourth engagement priority, a strategic goal for GEO, which is resilient cities and human settlements, which we pushed and tried to facilitate its approval. So, thank you.
Thank you, Evangelos. And then finally, Wendy.
Yes, thank you, Nico. Good morning, everybody. So Wendy Carrara from the EARSC Association. I'm also on the board of directors, as was mentioned earlier. So I'm here representing the association and everything that we can contribute to the overall policy making in the context of resilient cities and human settlements, and more broadly speaking, urban activities. I'm also here on behalf of Airbus Defence and Space, where I sit in intelligence. We're basically focused on the development of services, so how downstream sector and applications can be particularly helpful. I've developed, along with other industry partners, a project around digital twins for cities in the fields of mapping cities with Earth observation and 3D modeling and simulating what-if scenarios that I'll probably talk a bit more about during the panel today. And I'm really excited about being here this morning, because it's clear that there's a very strong contribution that Earth observation can bring in the context of understanding urban settlements, but also helping policymakers and city decision makers understand what sustainable choices they need to make, and how they can share best practices with other geographies and cities that are asking themselves the same questions.
Thank you, Wendy. Before diving into the actual discussion, allow me to briefly share my screen so that we have a look at a summary of the roadmap that we have defined for urban development. Let me find the right presentation, which is here. Share my screen, ask the usual question, can you see it? And then
yes,
go into presentation mode. So today we are talking about urban development. As Natasha said, we addressed 6 sectors in total with the FIRE project. In the course of the project, and also again during yesterday's sessions that we had, we have been often asked why these segments, why not specific other segments, and we agree that many sectors can probably benefit from better developed solutions that are enabled by Earth observation. Yet we had to focus on some, and also throughout the project it has been confirmed that those that we focused on, and also in particular urban development, are indeed important to look at, because there you can have a strong value proposition for Earth observation solutions. And as also indicated already in the video that Natasha shared with all of us on the reasoning why urban is an interesting field to look into. It's something that affects all of us. So we all live in cities or urban areas, and even if not, we are affected by them, be it because they contribute to the economy, be it because they also contribute, unfortunately, to environmental degradation, and exposing us to the increased risks that come from themselves, but also from general environmental trends such as climate change. And this was confirmed throughout these discussions that we had, also with other sectors, where we then were able to identify what were the key challenges, and what are the priorities that need to be addressed, and try to derive actions that we propose to tackle these challenges with solutions that are enabled by Earth observation. We followed the same methodology for all these segments, starting with some desk-based research to understand a bit better what are the developments and trends in market and technology, what is already happening in research, and developments. What is driving maybe also these sectors in terms of policy, and what are the user needs that we could already identify through desk research and through our existing understanding of the sectors and of Earth observation. And we then had these findings validated by focus group discussions, where we invited potential users from across the value chain, in this case of urban development. So we had municipalities, urban planners, construction or engineering companies that engaged in discussions to either confirm what we already identified, or to complement it, or to challenge it, and then together with us prioritize areas that need attention, and also start defining how solutions have to be designed so they can be put to use by the different types of end users. We also did benefit from a greater community that we refer to as the FIRE community through a series of events, the so-called FIRE Forum. This is now the third one of these. The first ones focused still on the users. This one now has a slightly different focus, because now that we have the roadmap developed, we need to engage with other stakeholders that can ensure that this roadmap is implemented. And using all these different inputs, we synthesized these and developed a roadmap with very specific actions for the different sectors that we addressed, including the one of urban development. And in a nutshell, we looked at where are we now. So what is the current situation of urban areas? What is the current capability of Earth observation, maybe to support urban actors, and where do we want to be? So what kind of solutions do we need? What are the priority themes? And then finally, how do we get there? What are the proposed actions? Where do we need more research and development? Where do we need solutions that enable urban stakeholders to tackle their challenges? And as for the where are we now, we have identified key drivers that are known. There's worldwide, the populations are growing. There's increased urbanization. So many of the world's population do live in cities or urban areas. We do know that urban areas are crucial also in their impact to the environment and to the climate, and that in order to reach certain targets that are also dictated by policies, we need to enable decision makers, urban stakeholders to better plan and to monitor urban areas so as to reach these goals. So some of these include the urban agenda of the EU, and we are lucky to have DG REGIO present today to explain this a bit more in detail. There are principles provided by the OECD. There are the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, one that is specifically on sustainable cities, but also others that relate to the health and well-being of citizens. That is, of course, much impacted by how cities are designed. Looking at where the market is at the moment for Earth observation, so what is the existing uptake of using Earth observation-based solutions to tackle these challenges, we can see that there is an initial market. There are some revenues observed, and there's the anticipation that these revenues will grow significantly, also driven by the current trends in environment and the requirements that policies impose. And as regards existing research and development activities that we have observed, so we noticed that many R&D projects that already tackle urban challenges, they already include Earth observation in their approaches. There's a pattern visible that many focus on urban resilience solutions, but also on the data side itself. So independent of what the nature of the data is it EO data or other data, there are of course many initiatives from which also Earth observation can benefit, that allow to process data, that allow to analyze data, because it's not sufficient to have the data that covers large areas of the planet. You also need means to automate then the solutions that they enable, and there also artificial intelligence, for instance, plays a role. As to where do we want to be, so the priority themes that we have derived with the help of the FIRE community, there are 5 that we identified or prioritized for urban development. One is urban resilience. So there's the need to enable urban stakeholders to make cities or urban areas resilient against, for instance, disasters or extreme events. So climate change leads to an increase in such events such as floods or heat waves, and urban stakeholders need to be able to assess how vulnerable the areas are to such risks, and also what the impact of such events would be. And then they would need to be able to plan in a way to prevent such impacts or lower such impacts, or to respond to events immediately, such as to point emergency services to the right spots. There's the subject of smart cities, that is also seen as potentially benefiting from Earth observation solutions, because it requires, of course, a number of data sources way beyond satellite information. It requires that these sources are connected. It requires that the citizens are connected, and that other urban actors are connected. But it also requires solutions for mapping or simulation, and this is where Earth observation can play a role. There's the subject of green cities, green in the sense of both vegetation, so make the cities greener to have better air quality, to have more shadow and less heat, but also make them in general more sustainable. We have the subject of controlled growth, so an increase in population, and sometimes a very fast increase. So some cities are growing at a very high pace, often means that they are growing in an uncontrolled way, and making them even more vulnerable to certain risks. And urban planners need to be able to control the growth of the urban spaces. And the last one, which sounds generic if it's written in 3 lines, but you can find summaries, but also the whole roadmap document on the project website on fire-forum.eu. So the last point is here, empowering the urban stakeholders with information so that they can make better informed decisions. And these priority themes then have been translated into a number of actions, 7 here for urban development. Then I will also just briefly present here, and that you can find in more detail than online. So we have identified one action that we call interfaces for analysis-ready data. So through the discussions, we realized that while there is data available, it might not always be accessible for the right people. It might be already usable, or it might need to be further processed to become usable, but then it also needs to be accessible and integrated into systems that cities, for instance, already use, which is currently not the case. We have the subject of integrating Earth observation data into building information modeling tools. This we see as like a quick win, because these tools are increasingly used, and they're even becoming often mandatory. So these are digital tools to plan, design, and operate and maintain buildings or build infrastructure. And integrating data that is derived from Earth observation would be a quick win to increase the uptake of the usage among also urban stakeholders. We have the subject of in-situ integration. So many cities already use EO data. Maybe they are not aware of it, or they don't call it like that. But also, EO data is not only satellite data; it's also sensors that are on the ground. But there's a variety of these, and some are in the hands of the cities themselves. Some are maybe in the hands of citizens. And to create a comprehensive picture of certain parameters, can be air quality, for instance. You need to integrate all these sources. You have to validate them, and solutions are required to achieve that. Again, the subject of resilience, that is requiring solutions where urban stakeholders are able to analyze the land use and to simulate what is the impact of a disastrous event, and to even have almost real-time information that comes from Earth observation to guide emergency services in these events. We have the subject of digital twins, so I'm happy that Wendy mentioned this and can tell us a bit more about the subject. So digital twins is a concept that allows to create a digital version of very complex systems, and that can be buildings, it can be a whole city or urban area, which then allows also to make simulations and then make better planning. And Earth observation data can support greatly here in creating certain maps as an input to very data-rich models, and that requires further research as this is a very complex matter that requires also certain resources. We also proposed an action related to the innovation of public procurement, so to include Earth observation data in public procurement, which has the requirement to be transparent, efficient, accessible, and which we believe can benefit from EO data in that regard, making transparent also the implementation of certain procured projects, such as buildings or infrastructure. And finally, as a last action that we have proposed, is to do more research and development that leads to solution for human settlement monitoring, which requires improvement as regards the quality of data, the frequency of updating this data, and capacities to process the data and to integrate it into systems that then allow, for instance, urban planners to monitor what is there and to see also over time how it develops, to identify illegal structure or illegal building height, etc. These are the 7 actions that are part of the urban development roadmap, and which I would now like to further discuss with the experts here in the panel. And as a first step, I would want to check with you as institutions that drive similar actions and that utilize maybe also Earth observation in how valid are these actions, how much are they in line with what you are currently doing. And I would like to start maybe with Valeria, as knowing that EUSPA also drives actions in urban development with a focus on Copernicus, but looking probably also in Earth observation in the broader sense. So how do the actions that you've just seen match your strategy?
Yeah, I could see that all the slides that you presented were in line with our overall strategy. You know that the EUSPA has a user-oriented approach, And in particular, in our department, we are working in close contact with users. Probably many of you already have heard the main activities that we are doing in our department. We have activities that are divided in 3 pillars. So one of these pillars is demand support, where we use to interact with users in order to understand which are their the needs and transfer the needs in user requirement. An important event that we organize is the user consultation platform. We had in December last year the first user consultation platform where we analyzed the user requirement, the user needs in a synergetic way, including GNSS user requirement and Earth observation. In the next UCP in December next year, we would also extend the user requirement to other space program component as the GovSatcom. So we are trying to analyze the market segment from a wide, considering all the space program components. And the last year, as I was saying, we had the user consultation platform for the infrastructure segment. Next year, we will have other user consultation platform and other market segment panels. Probably urban development will be one of these panels that we will discuss in the next UCP. In any case, we also in the market department, we also try to understand the market, which are the trends and the forecast and so on. And last year we published an important market segment, an important market report, that is the Earth observation and the GNSS market report. I invite you to consult, to read our report, and because there are all the market segments, including urban development and other market segments. We have in particular 17 market segments. And another important activities that we have is, of course, the R&D activities, where we are managing several R&D programs. One of these is Horizon Europe, but also the CINEA initiative, where we are in touch with the SMEs, and we had important hackathons. One in the past was related to digitizing green space, that wanted to have new solution to support the urban planning. We also, within our Copernicus activities, we also launched a tender for that was called Copernicus Demonstrator, because we would like to have a proof of concept for various domains, and urban development is one of these domains. There is open and a Horizon Europe call that will with the deadline that 3rd of March. And as Nico was saying, there is this open call for the public authorities. There is this action that is called, if I remember well, public sector as Galileo and Copernicus user, or something similar. But you can have a look at the European Commission tender portal, and you will see this this tender, that this call for proposal that has the objective to procure a solution for the public authorities. And of course, it's an open call where also a solution for the urban development can be submitted. So as you can see, considering all our activities, and I think we are absolutely in line with the strategy that you presented a few seconds ago.
Thank you, Valeria. That's very encouraging, also in terms of the way forward, because of course we need now very strong partners and the right entities to put this into place. And it sounds like that EUSPA is indeed already following some actions that are in line with our actions. Maybe a question to Richard. I understand that I mentioned a number of policies that are driving urban development at the moment. I didn't mention the EU Green Deal, although this has a number of policies that certainly also affects urban development. And CINEA is implementing the EU Green Deal. How much are cities already in focus of your efforts in that regard? And how do you think do the actions that we proposed and you've just briefly seen could support your efforts?
Well, it's important to also, in particular, to keep in mind that CINEA, it's not actually implementing the policies, it's supporting the key actors, researchers, local authorities, stakeholders, to implement the activities that are funded under the different EU programs that have been established to directly support the EU Green Deal. Especially, we have two clear examples: the missions, the mission climate adaptation and the mission cities. And there are funding programs in which, based on the calls for proposals, is exactly as Valeria mentioned, for other types of activities are launched on a regular basis. Currently are launched twice a year with specific objectives that have been prepared and agreed also with the different member states. In the specific case of CINEA, and regarding the policies and the support to the EU Green Deal call, CINEA implements the actions through the delegated programs. I already mentioned the Horizon 2020, the Horizon Europe, which annually there are different calls launched, and the implementation as such is done by the researchers, the local communities, which by we noticed, for example, there was a very subscription of the very last call of the Horizon 2020, the Green Deal call, in which was a clear example that all the actions are fully in line what is being implemented in terms of funding programs. The involvement of local authorities, while in past framework programs, I would say until the 7th framework program, local authorities, cities were being involved as the end users through communication and dissemination of what was being produced by the researchers. Now they are requested to be involved as, for example, beneficiaries of the consortia, in which they need to contribute in a two-way approach with the researchers, not only for the development of supporting tools within the actions proposed, indeed the interface for analysis-ready Earth observation data, the integration with in situ data, it's becoming more and more recognized as a key element. The projects being developed and implemented at the EU level require a multidisciplinary approach, which means that not only engineers, modelers, Earth observation data specialists are involved, but also citizen initiatives, citizen science, empowering citizens. It's becoming more and more required within the support to the EU Green Deal policies. And as a project officer of ongoing projects, focusing on climate action, urban development, but also the European partnership on driving urban initiatives, which is basically an harmonization of the EU funding programs to implement common actions at the international level, require the links and the feedback from the end users. And from the actions proposed in the roadmap, I would definitely say that the ongoing and the future calls under the Horizon Europe, for example, the specific topics under the different missions are fully in line with the actions. The only aspect that should be taken into account is there is a tendency of each project producing their own tools, for example, platforms, mobile apps to monitor air quality, microclimate in urban areas. It would be important to consider conducting a mapping of what has been already produced, which are the capacities and the limitations of each tool, because as mentioned, if data is not accessible, it basically does not exist. We have more and more data being produced, being stored, and also this management and optimization of their usage, it's very important, not only from the EU point of view, but also from the end users.
That's a very good and valid point, and we noticed in our consultations that there is still an issue in making solutions that already exist applicable to many different urban areas. So what works for one city has been specifically developed for that city. It might not simply be possible to use it for another one, and this is also where work needs to be done to enable that it comes like out of the box and can be just integrated into what cities currently already use, and that will lower certain barriers to using the data that is there.
And in particular, to optimize the effort, many tools that have been prepared in recently finished projects, once the project is finished, basically the tool is forgotten, and new actions, new users could definitely go beyond what is already done and use what is already developed, update with other facilities, but also the interoperability, it's a challenge from a past modeler using Earth observation data for the 3D configuration of urban areas, for example, for studying the impact of green infrastructures, is still a challenging, and more interaction between the communities and the researchers. It's also very necessary.
Thank you very much for raising this point as well. Maybe a question to Joachim. So you said it earlier. DG Regio is responsible for the urban agenda for the EU and for other initiatives that are related. Could you a bit elaborate on these? I understand there are some priority themes and that you're also supporting actions and action plans, and how much, again, the question, is this in line with what we have proposed?
Well, I think it's well aligned, and in fact we are almost at the implementing DG of EU policy. So cohesion budget for the current period from 21 to 27 is just over 400 billion euro. A large part of which is actually invested to support the European Green Deal, and then in particular in cohesion countries, where often the structural funds of the EU are the main source of public investment. The urban agenda is something that we do manage indeed. So this started in 2016 with the Pact of Amsterdam, and the agenda or the original idea of the urban agenda was to involve cities better in the design and in the implementation of EU policies. We did that with 15 thematic partnerships where different stakeholders from regions and cities met and discussed how we can improve actually the urban dimension of various EU policies. To this end, the thematic partnerships, they wrote action plans. I actually contributed to one of them as a scientist, so on sustainable land use. Maybe you have done as well. There were partnerships on climate, mobility, jobs, poverty, housing, and so on. So important areas for cities. Now we have entered actually a second phase that runs up till 26. This phase differs a bit in that we want more contributions now from small and medium-sized cities in the partnerships. We want a bit more focus on specific issues, and we have a new instrument now, the European Urban Initiative. A bit more on that later. There are four new partnerships now underway. Now, greening cities and sustainable tourism, this is launched. Food and cities of equality are now considered. They go through an ex-ante assessment, and we hope to launch them later this year. As I said, in this cohesion period that runs from 21 to 27, we support the urban agenda with this initiative called European Urban Initiative. This is a new EU funding instrument. It supports innovation in cities. It's mainly, I would say, and then there is also budget available for capacity and knowledge building on sustainable urban development. 10% of the cohesion budget goes actually to this initiative, so a total sum of 450 million. And this is managed. It's not directly managed by the Commission, but by one of the regions in France. And what that budget does is to launch calls for proposals to support, to really implement projects on sustainable urban development, supporting the Green Deal, supporting digitalization, and so on. A first call took already place. That ended mid-January, but more calls will follow. And here I think there is good opportunities for alignment with your initiative. Ultimately, I would say, I think every project that is submitted under this new initiative should have an an Earth observation component in it. So it's usually cities and administrations, regions that can apply. They set up collaborations with scientists, with universities, with research institutes. But I would there sort of scope the projects, maybe get in contact and see if and how Earth observation can actually support these projects. As I said again, it's essential that in the knowledge support that goes to cities, Earth observation is an element. And a bit more on that if you want in the next round. Thank you.
No, thank you. These are a number of very interesting aspects that you mentioned. So one thing I heard is that it's urban is actually a very wild field. That's also so these themes that you mentioned, they're very diverse. So there are many aspects that need to be tackled, and indeed such calls they present a good opportunity to bring in Earth observation as part of solutions, and as you mentioned that these require lots of R&D. Maybe getting to Evangelos here, who is part of the R&D scene and involved in many activities that apply EO to different applications in the urban sector, and also through REGIO, who has its own action groups and efforts. Evangelos, from your perspective, from what you are already driving yourself, how do the proposed actions support what you are already doing, and what is being done in R&D in this field?
Okay, so thank you, Nico. So I very much echo what both Richard and Joachim has been saying. And actually, I'm very happy because I see that discussions having in the past within different fora about the future of the calls and how to absorb, lessons learned are now reflecting, and now we are implementing new projects with all these concepts that we've been discussing in the past. So I think more or less previous speakers and the roadmap has been capturing very well the different topics that research R&D projects are dealing with: air quality, the greening of cities, heat waves, mobility and buildings efficiency, the engagements of citizens and citizen science, and Richard mentioned are just few more of them that it would come into my mind. However, what I would like to highlight is that I see a tendency, a trend during the last years and the last calls, obviously a planned trend to be as such. And this is a shift towards more integrated approaches, not only multidisciplinary, but also integrated approaches to design and implement solutions for cities. So under the umbrella of existing frames, such as urban resilience that we are discussing about, but also smart cities, urban sustainability, zero carbon cities, adapting to climate change cities, all these frames are now clearer than ever that they converge and they are in the same business. So several very interesting and important synergies are coming out, like for instance the interlinks between the different urban stressors with health, the nature-based solutions as part of the Green Deal that we have been discussing as means to mitigate pollution, but also climate change. So we are talking about trade-off, co-benefits, etc., etc. All types of impacts, for example, on urban heritage, old and new domain that we want to again tackle with, and in general well-being. Well-being is rising as an overarching goal into my mind. It's multi-parametric goal to pursue, so it's complicated, but I think it's the solution instead of individual, disconnected, strictly cost, oriented, and non-sustainable objectives that we pursue in individual projects. So probably in future projects, the famous KPIs table, if I see a KPI like happiness of citizens, I would be really pleased rather than, number of sensors and other technical arrangements. I don't know if there is a happy meter like thermometer, but okay, we can also be innovative in this aspect. So lately also, and this is also pushed by European Green Deal and the EU's urban agenda, I also see this very needed incorporation of the Earth observation-based urban approaches into other domains like circular economy, the energy transition. I still miss, to be honest, a little bit more activation in efficiently combining with socioeconomic data, which is very important in order to achieve a more holistic approach of solution along the whole chain of science, social policy and back to social interface. So indeed, in this aspect, the FIRE roadmap presents, to my opinion, a very concrete to the point overview of all this we are discussing, and offers not just a wish list, more tangible structural changes and priorities that we need to pursue in order to achieve climate urban resilience. For example, how can we further engage with cities by providing indeed analysis-ready data? What is that they really want? We are still in the Earth observation community failing to understand the what and the how. And this is important. How to create innovation in public procurement, for example. So practical arrangements. It's good to talk and have the solutions, but if they cannot apply for them and implement them, this is a problem. So in this aspect, I think this roadmap is going to be very useful paper to drive things in the European Commission, but also the Earth observation domain and GEO for sure.
Thank you, Evangelos. And what I would like to know now, and I think Wendy is the best to answer that, is if that can be confirmed also by industry. Is this what you are picking up as the current needs? And when we presented the roadmap earlier, we said that we see that there is an initial market, and we believe that the current drivers that we also presented might lead to increase in that market. Can you confirm that, or what is your perspective as representing industry?
Yes, sure. I mean, there's been a huge amount of very interesting things that have been said before that I all agree to. So I won't repeat everything, and it's where, from an industry perspective, seeing the what in terms of what it is that I can do at an urban level. And also the question of, well, how do I go about doing it in terms of understanding the different parameters, the different stakeholders, as well as benefiting from this entire, I would say, policy momentum, but also convergence on the more program type level. So there is a clear interest, a clear need. There's still a lot of evangelization, I would say, that's required in terms of showcasing the benefits, of explaining what is the difference between, for instance, remote sensing and other technologies. How does it complement what is happening? So we're still, I would say, in an awareness raising phase, with some areas that are, let's say, moving fast ahead compared to others. And a growing acknowledgement, I would say, over the past 2 to 3 years of the potential that Earth observation represents in terms of the imagery itself, but also all the derived services, so for monitoring constructions. There are some, let's say, anecdotal, quote unquote, examples, if I can use that term, illustrations in some countries to, let's say, monitor, for instance, or detect pools, but more globally to say, well, if when using remote sensing, I can understand global human settlements and understand how that maps against, let's say, population dynamics and such, and from there work on some data fusion. There is, however, I would say one challenge that we're facing from an industry perspective is that it's the how to go about that. So the what and the benefits, I believe there's a growing understanding of how it can help, what would be the benefits and the impact, but it's the getting about to doing it in a cost-effective manner, to say that it's about using the right data at the right time in an extremely complex environment. Because if you look at the different users and the different stakeholders in an urban aspect, you can have, for instance, the municipality, so the elected officials. You can have all the companies that are involved as third parties that are responsible for delegated, let's say, public services. You also have construction companies. You also have public safety authorities. You can even imagine that you have, let's say, real estate agents. You say, hey, but if I can have information about, heat islands as well as lighting, does that create a new way to increase or refine the value of the property? So that's just a very fine-tuned example where it's about getting all those different actors to converge and to use the data in a way by which we as industry, I would say, have a responsibility together, large and small, in, I would say, erasing the complexity of Earth observation. So it's not so much the pixels or the complexity of the different levels or the auto rectification or whatever you want to use, but to say That's part of the jargon on the industry side, and it's massively useful when you develop the machine learning techniques and such. It's just about, these people don't need to know and understand the complexity of that sensor at 600 kilometers above the ground. They need something very hands-on. And that's probably what we can discuss in the next panels, but we're clearly at that moment of time where the challenge lies on industry to say, if we can decomplexify Earth observation so it's the right data at the right point of time, it can be very, very useful more rapidly than we think in this convergence effort that we're seeing on the commission level, at EUSPA, but also in all the cities networks that are being constructed, we'll be able to leverage. So that would be the short answer, and I'm happy to elaborate further during the next panels.
Thank you. And how close do you think are we to that stage where it's possible to decomplexify and also as you mentioned in the very beginning, it's costly. How costly is it? And maybe also even on the example of digital twin, what efforts are needed to get there, which is probably a very complex effort.
Exactly. So I would say there are some sectors where we've done that quite successfully. If you take, for instance, agriculture and the way how Earth observation is now almost used systematically for crop monitoring, there's still some scaling up that's needed and some take up, of course, but we've decomplexified massively Earth observation so that farmers know how to use resources in a much more effective manner. We also do that in areas such as managing forests or deforestation footprint, by tying that into supply chains. If I take, for instance, my Airbus hat, we're doing that with a huge amount of big actors, institutional, but also private sector, where they don't know anything about satellite imagery. They simply need to know, is there deforestation in my supply chain? So it's about looking at this from an end-to-end perspective. And it's still, I would say, the effort is in the making sure that we keep it simple. And in Earth observation, like in many specialized areas, we're super happy and proud about how complex it is. So how to turn that around? And in the digital twin project that we've got here within Airbus, together with Dassault Systèmes, what we're doing there is to say, well, if we manage to get Earth observation, very high resolution, we transform that into very high resolution, very accurate 3D modeling. Can we plug into that simulation models that are state-of-the-art in terms of technology to measure dispersants, to measure heat waves, to measure acoustics, hydrodynamics, etc.? Do the two worlds collide and make something which is meaningful and extremely visual, so that you imagine, for instance, the pressure points on a bridge and the pressure points on the construction, should there be the water that rises X meters or X centimeters, for instance, linked to a flooding event or linked to global climate change and such. And how does that then help the cities? And in this project in particular, it's a very user-centric approach with a number of municipalities to say, give us a problem that you're facing, and we will see if the models make sense and if the simulations make sense for your decision-making. And I think here that the proof of the pudding is in the eating of the pudding and showing something which is immensely visual. And that sort of hides all the complexity of the technology, and it helps in solving the problem that the municipalities are trying to solve. And then I would say my comment back to the panel was to say, how do we benefit from this convergence to share this? And to, I think Richard was mentioning earlier, there's so much that does already exist in a huge number of individual programs and projects. How do we share that more so we capitalize on that and build it further and scale it? And if it's about, working on ontologies or working on a number of topics that show that it's not about reinventing the wheel systematically and being stuck after a 3-year project roughly at the same point. So that would be sort of one of my calls on this panel to say, guys, we really need to make an effort to share that, because municipalities don't necessarily have the luxury of waiting for something to mature and need to build on what they're doing, and they're very good at collaborating across cities as well, and probably very fast and agile in doing so.
Thank you, Wendy. What I heard, and correct me if I heard it wrong, is that it also needs, if you can prove that it's useful, then it will be adopted also by cities. But to get there, to create this proof of concept, it requires probably some also some efforts also finance, and maybe if we move forward to the implementation aspect in the discussion, maybe a question to Richard. How do, and we heard earlier from Joachim that there is the intention to integrate in the calls already the kind of obligation even to apply Earth observation. In your case, Richard, what do you think? How much do the work programs of the institutions already integrate Earth observation in the required approaches?
I can give a very specific example. In some of the topics recently published or that allowed now to projects starting early this year, in the topic-specific conditions was clearly mentioned that projects, I'm just gonna see exactly the correct wording. If projects use satellite-based Earth observation, positioning, navigation, and/or related timing data and services, beneficiaries must make use of Copernicus and/or Galileo, EGNOS, and clustering with projects to be funded under other relevant and complementary topics, considering that other data and services could additionally be used. But it's important to keep in mind that we have this topic-specific condition, but it needs to be included in the context of the area. Such requirement, it's commonly included in projects related to Earth system modeling, climate action, smart cities. But Commission as such, since there is the need also for the approval of the different member states, we cannot impose specific conditions. We can mainly encourage the applicants to use the latest technology, the latest data. Some communities, and it was already mentioned, including by Wendy and Evangelos, the interdisciplinarity, which is more and more visible and requested in the different actions, by default will imply the use of in situ, but also Earth observational data, wherever, the nature, air quality, land use, or other type of data. So requiring the use of Earth observation data, it may be also limiting. So it can have the a constraint factor to disencourage some outsiders, as we normally call it, to the known, as we normally tend to say, some communities are quite small, especially at the European level, and are the regular customers, as we usually say in the projects. So it's also important to encourage new researchers, new communities, local authorities, the industry also, to be involved in this interdisciplinary approach, because more and more the end users have a word to say on the implementation of the actions. And this is more and more clear and requested within the new Horizon Europe topics.
Okay, I understand. You cannot impose, of course, on those that offer you a solution to a call that they have to do this, because then indeed you might limit the creativity or the innovativeness of the approach presented. On the other hand, you also implied that the use of specifically Copernicus then might be obligatory. Could that limit?
Not only, no, because we need to keep in mind that the European programs are meant to fund member states and associated countries researchers, which considering the eligibility condition, and Europe having such programs, it's also important to the local scientific community uses what is being provided at the regional European level. And this specific condition, it mentioned if satellite data is used. It's not simply saying you need to use this data.
Understand. Then maybe to Joachim, because you were the one mentioning earlier that future calls might more explicitly require or recommend at least the use of Earth observation. Do you think this is a chance to implement these roadmaps or some of the actions that we proposed by including them, by maybe talking to the right units in the institutions to include them in work programs, so that future calls would include such recommendations?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I agree. I certainly agree with the roadmaps and what you propose as it comes to really sort of implementing them in work programs. I would maybe like to maybe as an example demonstrate how we as policymakers at the EU level make use of Earth observation to support our policies. And I don't think that's probably not fundamentally different than how national or regional or governments or cities would like to deal with it. What we are sort of constantly looking for regularly updated high resolution spatial data sets to monitor the impacts of investments on the regional policy, or to help design new and better policies. And an issue that we encounter, or really a bottleneck to do so, is that we don't find sufficiently off-the-shelf or analysis-ready data on Earth observation to do so. As a way to counter that, we finance this ourselves, and I think probably the best example is how we promote the use of global human settlements layer. That aligns well with one of your actions, so better data on settlements. So this is something in which we substantially invest. We work with the JRC, we work with UN and other international organizations to provide regularly updated data at 10-meter resolution on where where settlements are. We use that to make population maps. We would like to have sort of annual population maps, discriminating between sex, age, and so on. That's an essential tool really for cohesion policy, but for many other policies, we want to know where are people living, so that we can sort of better align our policy objectives, that we reach the right people, that we look at how accessible services are to people, and so on. That's obviously for many policies, also for emergency and so on. But having that data, integrating that now also in Copernicus, I mean, puts as a lot of financial constraints. And it's something that we have to keep on doing in order to have access to data. We would like to do the same in many other areas. So evidently, to follow sustainable urban expansion, to look at greenhouse gas emissions, to look at temperature, urban heat islands, which will be a problem of cities in the future, floodings, quality of life, following up of urban green spaces, but in all those areas, I mean, we see that it remains a bottleneck to go from approaches and data that is available up till the level where people, analysts like me, can have access to analysis ready data regularly updated. So I think in part of that is because researchers, they just like to do new things. They don't like to sort of repeat every year something that I did in the past 10 years. So I think that makes sense. But it's a problem that remains. I hope to some extent that artificial intelligence can replace scientists to implement and to do the boring parts of their work and to secure long-term data series. As you know, we are probably today on the verge of a new digital revolution with ChatGPT. So I certainly hope that those tools can also be implemented to provide indeed effectively the data streams that we need for monitoring and designing our policy. So there's still, I think, I would say, some work to be done by the EO community. So how to make that happen? Copernicus is indeed a fantastic service that does this to some extent, but it still requires a massive amount of resources. Overcoming that is going to be key in the next few years. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Maybe Evangelos, how does this resonate with you? And are there efforts, for instance, among GEO to tackle these issues that also some of which Joachim just mentioned?
Well, I mean, we are collecting amazing messages from the people that really need the information in order to build more added value on specific policies like cohesion policy that Joachim. So this is amazing discussion we are having now. So what's happening in GEO? For example, in the past period of GEO, first of all, is an intergovernmental international initiative group on Earth observations in an attempt to coordinate Earth observation around different key actors in the globe. And by Earth observation, we mean not just satellite data, but also Earth observation and all those other, platforms like models, including and citizen science, etc., just for the definition. So up to now, there have been some specific initiatives within GEO, like, for example, EU4SDG, the Human Planet Initiative, the Global Urban Observation and Information Initiative. And there have been also some urban aspects or implementation aspects in other initiatives. However, what we are discussing, like lack of synergy and fragmentation, or duplication of efforts and overlap, has been the case in many cases. So at a point, there was a new policy frame, the new urban agenda, and there was a specific request by the UN Habitat to GEO how it could contribute to specific Sustainable Development Goal number 11. And then we tried to start changing this landscape within GEO, understanding that more synergistic approaches would be needed in order to achieve what Joachim said, that we want the right information in the right format and the right timing to provide to end users. So in pursuit of this, we made a lot of effort to convince the global priority that on par with climate change, Sustainable Development Goals, and the DRR, disaster risk reduction, the urban agenda should be equally raised in the agenda. So it was this fourth engagement priority on resilient cities and human settlers approved last November. So upon this new frame and the new, let's say, setup that is happening in GEO, first of all, there's going to be a dedicated working group where the coordination of what the Earth observation community should be doing to address the questions that our colleagues here have mentioned will be part of the discussion. But not just that, in recognition of this need for synergies and collaboration between the different actors, there's new way of acting. We call it incubators or integrators. These are going to be thematic priorities where all assets from the EU community will be joining in order to achieve something tangible, but at the global scale. I will refer to what I think Joachim mentioned about heat and the need to map heat island in cities. So one of those incubators is going to be heat and health. The urban domain is unambiguously the big player in this area, so we are trying to figure out what capabilities exist over there and bring them together to produce something tangible. Another one is the global ecosystem extent, wetlands, etc. But again, the urban dimension should be there, and we put it in the general context, connectivity, green areas in city, etc., etc. So how do we plan in GEO to be doing this? I see three levels. One is the high liaison, where we talk with institutions on the UN level, like UN Habitat. You probably know that there's now a new global heat officer at the UN Habitat. So you imagine how much important it has become. Issues like that we are talking with UNSDSN. And in general, we are in the process to adapt our works in their agenda, but also, if possible, to influence their agenda with the new assets and capabilities that we are offered as Earth observation community. The second one is to bring city networks together in the GEO family, so that we can together do the strategic design and planning on how to implement those higher agenda. This is also important because they bring an overview of what the cities needs. But then, when it comes to the real implementation, the actual implementation of the solutions, then we also need to approach directly the cities and design the more tangible activities and actually match what is provided with the need, and then readjust the whole system. In this whole chain, I have described co-creation, which was mentioned by Richard, if I remember well, is really important. I think we have tested in a more practical way a co-creation process in one of the flagship projects of the European Commission called eShape, in support of EuroGeo. And the discussion in GEO is how you can probably adopt this methodology and start building upon this for the incubators, for the integrators, and other activities in an inclusive manner. In general, we understand that the urban resilience is a cross-cutting issue. So it is about climate change, it is about sustainable development goals, it is about DRR. So we need to bring together all this and make the discussion more inclusive, to make it also more efficient. So I think in these aspects, the agenda coming from the roadmap, coming from the FIRE Forum, and all these messages we are receiving, and we would certainly like to have these voices also closer to GEO and get these messages and try to make them through there is space for discussion and continuation of the forum, of the FIRE Forum discussions within GEO, within EuroGeo. There is an action group dedicated to urban resilience in EuroGeo. So I think this is the place also to keep the discussion alive. This is important.
Thank you, Evangelos. So I understand that research is responding to institutional needs, also directly to cities' needs. How about the industry, Wendy? If you've heard now many requirements and what has been said about what is currently missing, the right data at the right time in an appropriate time series. So there are many needs apparently. How can industry cater for that, and what does industry need to be able to do that?
Well,
yeah, first,
Wendy, please.
sorry, go ahead.
So just very quick, so maybe to give you a pass, I think this is one of the areas that GEO and the Earth observation community has been somehow failing to make progress, despite the great efforts and resources put on this aspect. I think the objectives of these two worlds, the industry world and the science world, needs to be a little bit more clearly set and find, first of all, the convergences and the common goal, and then find the means to pursue this in a way. We are still lagging behind in this, and I would be very curious actually to hear to Wendy's view on this.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I would say that here it's really about, we share a common goal, let's say, in terms of the take-up of Earth observation, and whether it's commercial Earth observation data or whether it's open data, be it Sentinel, be it Landsat, etc., because there's a lot of applications that use both. Not absolutely everything requires very high resolution, high revisits, and so on and so forth. It's the complementarity of the two. And often enough, I would believe that from an EARSC perspective or an industry perspective, industry has not systematically been invited nor consulted to the table of a number of groups, and it's something that should be done more systematically, because we're probably more on the front line in terms of interacting with actual users on the field, who are going to have to either spend money, run procurement, and implement something. So that would be a bit of a call from the heart to say that there's been an ambiguous positioning for coming from both sides, probably industry towards these different groups, but also the different groups about trying to find themselves in the right way to interact with industry. But in my view, we share this common agenda, and especially specifically in EARSC, where we represent a great diversity in terms of actors, large and small, European, non-European, and so on and so forth, to get around the table and to discuss what we were touching upon previously in terms of the assets that we have collectively and the story that we want to run, and basically the story that we want to describe together, and more importantly, sort of walking the talk and making sure that it's absolutely practical and it's something that we can implement. And here, it's also about us, for instance, from an industry perspective, helping the policymakers in making this case for the systematic inclusion of Earth observation in policy documents, and not always having to fight for that in terms of demonstrating again and again and again the benefits. So there's a momentum right now where it's less questioned, because there's a growing awareness around the benefits of remote sensing. But it still seems that from the policy perspective, we're in this sort of Groundhog Day where everybody thinks that their own sector is an island compared to what the others do. So if you say, but agriculture, they've done it for cat monitoring. Oh, but we're different. We do fisheries and maritime, we don't deal with farmers. Yes, but your needs are pretty much the same, aren't they? And here there's a lot that we could do if we worked perhaps closely together and were systematically included and involved in a number of the discussions. And I would say perhaps finally on the barriers and other aspects which we might see that are not necessarily the realm of the institutions to address, but are relevant to bring to the fore, because this can help other cities or other urban actors understand that there are others who are facing the same barriers and the same challenges, who have tried different ways, and they're all sort of learning to walk before they can run in this area. So that could also help create, let's say, a bottom-up or a multi-pronged approach to sharing best practices and such. So there were like questions inside the questions that you asked me, and I hope that I've covered them correctly. I could go on forever, but I'm also conscious of time and want to make sure that everybody has the floor.
No. Thank you very much for bringing up these points. That if I understand correctly, there's different ways of collaborating necessary, but also of dialogue, and this is very much at our heart as well. Now that this project ends, and we had some proven methods to engage different stakeholders into dialogue, we believe that this has to continue now also after the end of the project, and that some of the successful methods that we applied, our focus group discussions, the Evangelos program, where we make use of sophisticated speakers that know both the sector as well as of observation to bring the message of observation into the sector, that there's some sort of continuity, and there will be actually also questions then to all of you that have the possibility to facilitate such dialogue. EUSPA Valeria, who's currently on the way to the airport, so I hope she will be visible soon again, mentioned EUSPA's efforts in regularly offering the user consultation platform as one means. What is happening in other institutions, and maybe then to Richard and Joachim, how do you include the user voice, but then maybe also extending this to the industry, where Wendy said that they are often maybe not included in this dialogue. Yeah, whoever wants to start.
Well, from the executive agency point of view, we always ask projects closer to the end of the action to provide a key feedback during the project lifetime, to produce what we call policy briefs with key messages for policy makers, decision makers, not only for the EU level, Commission, but also for the national and regional local authorities. There is ongoing, I think it's until the 23rd of February, a public consultation of the past, ongoing and future framework program of the Commission in terms of funding research. And it's very clear that in the recent years, while the framework programs were mainly dedicated or seen as a funding to research and innovation actions, more and more the different actors are requested to be involved actively in the actions. I mentioned several times the interdisciplinary consortia or the multidisciplinary targets of the actions in the different topics. Even if they have a key objective, it's more and more important the actual involvement and engagement of the different actors. This is from the executive agency point of view, of course. And I will give the floor to Joachim.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously engage in discussions with our stakeholders and our users. I mean, mostly these are managing authorities, I would say, from regions and cities who have applied for funding under the structural funds that we provide. So sort of admittedly, often these exchanges between us and our stakeholders have a very technical nature, sometimes maybe a bit distant from citizens. Then again, we do efforts to set up communication on, well, I would say, cohesion policy broadly, the urban agenda, and would definitely be interested to also set up initiatives, communication activities on how to better integrate urban observation, Earth observation in function or in support of our policies. We typically do so with meetings and forums. In next month, actually in March, we organize an urban or a cities forum in Torino, which is all sort of focused on the urban agenda. And yeah, I would invite communities like yours to also, I mean, send a representative or organize a session to actually demonstrate there how Earth observation can be used in cohesion policy, in implementing programs. We do so typically in September, a full week in Brussels, the week of cities and regions, where we open up for a massive amount of sessions the whole week under the various under our various policy objectives, such as smart and green and urban and so on, which is, I mean, very well used by the community to demonstrate again how science, how data, how Earth observation, how different experiences can support a better policy. So I think that's a sort of main channels that we use and how we go in dialogue with our users and stakeholders. Maybe also interesting to note is that the Commission last year internally has created a knowledge center on Earth observation that's managed by the JRC. I represent our organization in that center, again with the same purpose. So how can we mobilize and increase access to Earth observation data for specific policy purposes? And in that perspective, again, we are extremely interested to better understand how we can map urban heat islands, how we can sort of map and monitor the energy efficiency of buildings, because these are areas where a large portion of our funds will go to and to invest in. So I'll leave it with that, but I invite you all to look at these opportunities, in particular EU Week of Cities and Regions as a main sort of forum to promote your activity, and why not to also seek for partners for the implementation of your roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. We are coming a bit closer to the end of today's session. What I understood from today is that yes, some of our actions resonate with the panelists, and that there's hope for indeed implementation of these through different means. Also understand that you're not only entities that are driving the implementation, but that in many cases you even are the customer for such solutions, and that indeed it is was fruitful to have also the industry side and the R&D side present in this panel, and we do want to ensure that such dialogue keeps taking place. And so thank you for sharing also all the events and opportunities to engage in such dialogue. I would also include in the dialogue, of course, the audience of this panel discussion. So if you have any questions that you want to pose, you can do that in the chat, or now we can open the microphones also directly to any of you to address our panelists directly. I've seen one question that where I'm afraid we may not be able to answer it with this panel, because it's very specific on the provision of certain EO data, which is maybe not from the institutions that we have present here today, but we keep note of this question and will pass it on to the appropriate units, which was a question on how to access the database of EO market and industry and subset to make it work with the project. I don't know if this is a question maybe that even Evangelos could answer. So the question comes from Sylvia Brenner, and maybe you want to ask it directly. I don't know if Sylvia is still present.
Hello, Brenner.
Oh, sorry.
Not a problem. The question is I want to plan projects, and I need to get a view specific view of the market who are working in that, and other companies that could join effort, or players in the market. What are and that changes from project to project, from 2 years to 2 years. That could change because of new technology and so. And I would like, for example, I've read the report. There is a subdivision. It is a PDF data. Then I have that static view, and I want to make a new subdivision. I cannot. I have to assume to use those assumptions. That was the question. If I have that database or access, I don't know. It could be restricted or in somehow, then I could get the information that I need on these players, like revenue or activity based on that activity. And that could be the target of my project.
So I'm not sure if among the panel someone is able to answer it. Maybe the closest to the subject would be Evangelos to understand how the current databases work. But if not so, then we will try to pass this on to people that maybe work with the DIAS or other such sources.
If I may, I can just comment that this is a well understood problem, and that's why there is a discussion nowadays in GEO about what the role and what the functionalities of the so-called GEO portal under this GEOS system of systems concept should be. So yeah, indeed, we understand that sometimes the findability or the accessibility of the right information is not easy. There are different technical solutions that are proposed to improve this issue. So yeah, I know there is discussion around this. From the market point of view, like EOMOS, etc., I'm not fully aware of what the situation is, but this would definitely be a very interesting discussion also to have this mapping.
Thank you. Do we have other questions or interventions? There, I see a new question in the chat. Maybe you want to ask it directly. And I think it can be a question for anyone in the panel. So the question is, how do you see the future of EO-derived products being integrated for supporting policies in Europe? They are already highly embedded in our work. What guarantees are offered in terms of continuity and quality? It's a question for Myra, and there she is.
Yeah, that's mainly the question. I don't know who can take it. We know in our models, the EO data is already highly embedded, and we are very strong users of Copernicus and EA data, and also from soil. And the problem that we're facing now is sometimes we need to provide specific deliveries for a certain period, and we don't have the data available for that period because it's not being processed on time. So how do you see this problem being addressed in the future, maybe with machine learning? And also the quality of data is sometimes not what we expect.
Anyone on the panel?
Yeah, I'm happy to address it. Hello, Myra, how are you? And it's something on which I reflected already also in my second intervention to some extent. So there remains a gap between providers of EO data and the actual users, and I think that gap is currently just sort of, or is mostly being closed or filled by users who are willing to invest often substantial amounts of budgets to customize certain products. I think sort of changing that model. I hope at least in the future that to some extent machine learning and artificial intelligence can take over these roles, and that they can be used to provide sort of consistent flow of regularly updated and customized data sets for different users. It's sort of a shame that we invest billions of euros in new sensors, in a stream from sensors to service providers, but then that there is still this sort of gap between actual take-up and the use of these data in monitoring systems, and yeah, this is something that has to be closed indeed. I think by the end of this decade, but I'm positive about upcoming solutions for this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Joachim. I am positive about the KCEO initiative by the EARSC, and I think there's a good way forward in that way.
Can I jump in quick, Nick, on this?
Yes, please.
So there was another aspect like directly supporting policy in Europe. I think here there is another gap lying. I mean, we are producing the tool or the service or the information or the need data. I suppose, or I know that for policymakers, what they actually need is not the data to be used in some kind of analysis just and make the conclusions, but they also need a more complete package, which would include the cost and the different impacts of the solution we are referring to through different pathways. So this is what we are missing. We are missing something between research and the Earth observation research and the policymakers. And here is where collaboration with all these macroeconomic scientists and socioeconomic science is very important to bridge the gap between our part of research with the policymakers, from my point of view.
Also a response from Wendy to that, to the previous point.
Yeah, to the question as well, perhaps to add a different level of answer. It's when we hear questions about or comments about the data quality, there's of course, say the completeness and the exhaustive nature of the time series that are necessary in some contexts, and also in terms of the role that we have, we also have to be cautious in the way that we evangelize and communicate to make sure that Earth observation is not seen either as the silver bullet that will absolutely solve everything in a cost-effective manner. It has its limitations, it has its complexity, and I'm actually witnessing that firsthand in an infrastructure monitoring project in Europe, where some of the stakeholders saying, "Oh, but I'm disappointed. I thought I would be able to do this and this and that, or see this and this and that." And here we're talking about very high resolution data, which is, let's say, augmented to 15 centimeter accuracy, which is basically the best you can get on the market. And they're like, "Oh, but I can't see enough. I thought I'd be able to see this and that." So there's also this, let's say, wow perception of Earth observation, and to manage that correctly, so you don't mismanage the expectations of the users who then believe that they can do absolutely everything with it in all sorts of fashion. So I also believe that on the industry, but also on the policy side, we have a sense of responsibility there to make sure that these users who are starting to adopt the data also know what it is that it can provide, but also know what it is that it will not provide as well. So it's just to chip that into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So expectations are sometimes higher than what is currently possible, apparently.
Oh, you turn it into a science fiction movie, basically, where people have, they're sort of used to seeing in sci-fi movies or in some, like, I don't know, police inquiry movies that they can just task the satellite, get the data, get this and no, it's a bit more complex, you know, and it provides hands-on insights, hands-on absolutely everything, but we're not in a sci-fi movie yet where you can basically see what it is that your neighbor has been hiding under the doormat at this stage, or you cannot analyze minerals that are below ground using either radar nor optical imagery. So there's that temptation from some users to say, wow, it can do everything. Can it also do that? Can it also do this? And when they realize that there are some things that it cannot do, they can be a bit frustrated. So it's just about managing that when you start talking about Earth observation.
Okay, thank you. And Richard also has his hand up.
And just to complement what was already said, this is why from a project advisor point of view, I'm always insisting the joint actions, interdisciplinary consortia to be actively involved in the different projects, the different developments, involve the end users, whether experts or even just citizens, local authorities, in what is being produced within the projects, involving not only Earth observation, but modeling, social sciences. Social sciences, for instance, nowadays it's becoming more and more requested in specific topics and clearly stated in the topic text. And this integration of the different disciplines that I would say in the past were completely separated and talking, discussing in completely different languages needs to be to go beyond and to definitely be considered in constructing a project, constructing an action, and not only geo interacting very closely with the modeling community, with the policymakers. This is very important and more required, not only in the European level, but the international.
Thank you very much. If we don't have any other comments, maybe also from the audience or questions, I think I would hand over back to Natasha. I would like to thank all of you, and I hope that we can continue this sort of dialogue. And I believe also with EUSPA we have here an agency that can facilitate it also in the future to bring together the users, the researchers, the industry, and also those that are responsible for policy. I conclude and hand over to Natasha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico. Thank you all for joining this urban development session and the great discussion. All the questions, the comments, all the insights were very interesting. And for sure, have learned a lot, even though I have been, participating to the fire forums at the beginning. But still, we have 6 sectors, and each one of them has its own beauty. So, as a final conclusion for me is that obviously the Earth observation has the potential to contribute to the planning, to the monitoring of urban spaces, to cope with the growing population, the climate change, and various other challenges. Which can help making our lives even better, our cities even better. But of course, as we have been saying, still many things need to be done. And it's very important to continue this dialogue and always learning and always talking to each other. So we always have to, put the policy officers, the industry, and of course the users in the same table. I would like to thank Wendy, Valeria, Richard, Joachim, and Evangelos for your very nice contribution and your time. But also I would like to thank Nico for presenting the roadmap and keeping the discussion alive. Soon you will receive an email from me, soon, maybe at the end of the day, because we have another session coming up, with a PDF version of the roadmap. And next week, once we are done with the Fire Forum 2023, you will receive the recordings and all the interactive fire roadmaps. Don't forget that, again, that this afternoon at 2, we will carry on the discussion in a similar sector, because of course there are many synergies between the urban and infrastructure sector, and on purpose we put them on the same day. So if some of you still want to attend and you haven't registered, please do it, because we are using different Zoom links. So thank you once again for joining us today. Have a great day. And if you need anything from us, feel free to write to me or to my colleagues. Thank you.